This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, everyone. It looks like we have a few people that are still joining us, but I'll take care of a few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, my name is Laura Davis, and I am the president and founder of Ignite HR. And we are an HR outsourcing company for businesses that have 200 or fewer employees. And we come in and do a full scope of services, everything that an in-house HR department would do without the cost that's typically involved with that sort of staffing. For today's presentation, we will be using the chat feature for questions. So if you'll just type those in there, I will answer those as they come in. And then after the presentation, I will email the slides to everyone. You'll notice that whenever we get into the bulk of the presentation, I'm going to pop off camera so that you can see the text that's on the screen. This particular topic does have quite a bit of wordiness to it, but I think it's important for you to have those notes. So you don't have to scramble to write down everything that's on the screen. You will be getting a copy of the presentation later on this afternoon. And if you want to hear anything that I say again, or if you'd even like to share this presentation maybe with managers that are on your teams, the replay will be available on our YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube with the @ Ignite HR. And that typically takes me a couple of hours to get posted after the main presentation, but it will be there later this afternoon. Also, I'd like to invite you to check out our website for other free resources. That's ignitehrpro.com. We've been posting lots of cool stuff there, articles that you'll find very interesting and can be very helpful in managing your business and your people, as well as some resources such as the Department of Labor and news on the recent FLSA and non-compete agreement rulings that have come down. So you might want to follow that or follow us on social media. We are very active on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So we try to keep everyone posted on HR happenings in those locations. So without further ado, I'll jump into what we are talking about today, and that is supercharged job descriptions. So we all know, hopefully you do anyway, that job descriptions are absolutely a must-have tool. Whenever I met with my team recently and we were talking about clients, what are the basic things they absolutely must have to survive in the HR world? Number one, an employee handbook. It's a must-have. Number two, standard operating procedures for their HR management. And the number three thing that came up was job descriptions. And we use those in human resources almost on a daily basis. We evaluate the FLSA status. So with that, we need to know who does this position manage? What kind of work are they doing? Where are they spending most of their time? And the job description allows us to accurately determine that information so that we can decide, is this an employee an exempt or non-exempt? In the real world, we call that hourly versus salary. So an accurate job description is the only way that we can make a good determination about that. We also use it to determine if a person can be classified as an independent contractor versus an employee. We research compensation and do planning using the job description. Of course, we use it in recruitment. We don't post the actual job description, but we use the job description to create the job posting. And then we use it throughout the process to make sure that we have the candidates that fit the position correctly. We use it in performance management, in succession planning. Whenever we do workers' comp and disability claims, that's one of the things that we really need to know, because we are working either with an insurance company or a physician to determine if an employee can get back to work yet. So we need to know what the requirements of the position are. And if we already have accurate, up-to-date job descriptions, that's the perfect tool to use. And we're not scrambling at the last minute to figure out those things. Also, ADA accommodation request. This is when an employee comes to us and says, I need different working hours, or I need some sort of tool to do my job in a different way because I have a disability. So that helps us to determine what is feasible for that position and what is reasonable, or if we can change the job to accommodate the request. And lastly, unemployment claims and other legal claims that we face. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, the likelihood that you are going to have a Department of Labor wage and hour claim or a discrimination claim is just absolutely skyrocketing. In this age of social media, people understand their rights a lot more than they did in the past. And whenever they understand their rights, they are going to the appropriate authorities and filing claims against employers that they don't believe are treating them fairly. So in human resources, we need to already have these tools in place so that we can ensure that we are treating people correctly, that we're paying them correctly, and that we are applying the correct standards of performance and behavior to them. And it behooves us to have that before the claim is ever filed so that we can prevent the claim from being filed. If we're doing it later, after the fact, that's a very reactionary position to be in and just not really where you want to be as an employer. So what's the difference? What are we talking about? Traditional supercharged job descriptions. So I'm sure we're all familiar. We've all seen a traditional job description. And for the most part, we write those and they kind of sit up on a shelf and only human resources really uses it. They contain tasks, responsibilities, the qualifications, and the working conditions. You may be pulling that out whenever you need to fill a position or something of that nature, but for the most part, I just don't see managers using them on a day-to-day basis. But if we supercharge those documents, we can change that and make them a very dynamic document that changes as the business needs change and as the organization change or regulations change or technology changes. That's something that we're referring to on a very regular basis, and we use it to manage the employee. So the supercharged job description that I'm going to be showing you today is everything that's in a traditional job description. We're not wadding those up and throwing them away. So if you've already got great job descriptions in hand, you've won half the battle. We're just going to take it to the next step. We're going to add purpose, expectations, priorities, and standards, and then we are going to use those tools as a part of our performance management process. And the reason that we want to do that is we want employees to understand exactly what is expected. We don't want any surprises at review time. That is like probably the most unfair thing that a manager could do to an employee, is to sit down and give them a review when they never clearly communicated what was expected from the person. So by supercharging the job descriptions, we can align performance and behaviors with the goals, the mission, and the vision of the company. And so that's what we're working on today. And at the end of the day, if you do it for no other reason, make performance appraisals way more easy for yourself. I would love to see job descriptions get to the point that it's a yes or no question. Imagine doing away with all those rating scales, like what's the difference between a 3 and a 4? What does it mean to meet expectations versus exceed expectations? What if we could get rid of all of that? And really, it would be a yes or no question if we were able to be that clear with our expectations. So with that, I would say we must start with a solid traditional job description. So just very quickly, I'll run through those contents so that you can understand what needs to be there so that we have a solid foundation for building on. Of course, we need the job title, who manages the position, and the FLSA status. And if you don't have the FLSA status just yet, that's something that someone in human resources could advise you on, and certainly something myself or my teammates could do. We want to list all the responsibilities and the duties, and I suggest that you section those by importance. I think it should have two sections. Number one, essential duties and responsibilities, and number two, secondary duties and responsibilities. So essential duties are those things that you're doing like every single day. Those are the most important things that the job entails. What is core to the position? What would the position be less effective if it did not contain? Those are the questions that you need to ask yourself. And those are the things that you put in the essential duties and responsibilities section. Now, there's secondary things that all of us have to do. And of course, those do need to be on the job description. For example, one of the essential duties and responsibilities of my position as a human resources consultant is to provide support to my clients to determine if they are meeting compliance regulations. That would go in my essential duties section. I also have the secondary duty or responsibility of managing my team. So those are things, if I were writing a job description, I would separate out those two things. And of course, managing a team, depending on the position, might be an essential duty. It's all a matter of context for the particular position that we are writing the job description for. And then we'll go through qualifications and competencies such as education, experience, and what we in the biz refer to as KSAs, that's knowledge, skills, and abilities. So that's where you put stuff like communication and leadership. And then moving on to the next section, we'll put physical requirements. Do they have to be able to sit for extended periods of time? Or is this a position where they're working in a warehouse and they might have to lift 25 pounds or walk or stoop or use their fingers to do very intricate work? That's where we would list that information. And then the working conditions are the environment. Are they in the office? Are they in a warehouse? Is it climate controlled? Are there any dangers that the employee may encounter in a work day? That's where we put things related to the environment. The work schedule and the work location. I would say when we audit job descriptions, this is the number one and number two thing that we find missing. And by work schedule, I mean, is there a certain work hour and days that are required? For example, if you are at a medical office and you are looking at the position that is your front desk receptionist, must they arrive at 7:45 a.m. to begin greeting patients whenever they arrive? If so, that needs to be in the job description, because imagine this, if I were sending this in for an unemployment claim because the employee quit or was fired because they couldn't get to work till 8:30, how do I prove that I communicated to that employee that this work schedule was required and it was essential? So that is something that should be contained in the job description. It's just a nice, neat place to ensure that that detail is always covered. And then the work location. I would say 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know if I was so diligent about putting this on the job description. However, thanks to COVID, many, many, many more people began wanting to work from home. And if there is a true business need for that person to work from the office, I need to communicate that on the job description. If it is a person, say, who is in medical billing, is there a need for them to work from the office? Is it a certain need, like essential or required? And if so, why? We don't ever want to put things on the job description as essential or required if they really aren't, because later on down the line, we may encounter a challenge to that job description. So let's say that an employee came to us and they told us that They needed to work from home because they had an immunosuppressant disorder that caused them to be more susceptible to infections, and their doctor has advised that they should not work from an office where they may be exposed to viruses or things of that nature. Well, if we said, well, unfortunately, you're a front desk receptionist, and that is an essential part of the position to be at the office, that's one thing. But if we're looking at a medical billing person who may be able to work from home, depending on the job requirements, if we force them and we're not flexible there, we may not be able to prove our point. So we might say it is preferred that the employee work from home, or we may say it is required. However, the company will consider accommodations as requested or as required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there are things that we can require because they are our preference, but at the same time, we have to have that flexibility. We can't just automatically say every single person absolutely must work from our office without question. So once you get all these things lined out, you've got your traditional job description in order. So the first thing that we want to do is look at that job description and supercharge it with purpose. So if you're a manager or in human resources yourself, you have probably read that the culture over the last 5 or 6 years has shifted to people really seeking purpose and meaning in their jobs. So we need to think about, what is the purpose of this job? And to demonstrate these points today, I am going to be using a grocery store clerk, you know, that person that checks you out at the grocery store. And no, I don't mean yourself, like when you go through self-checkout. I mean, back when there was actually a human that did that. So what's the purpose? Why is a grocery store clerk there? And I would say it's to provide fast, accurate, and excellent customer service. So you might think about, okay, well, how do I define that for a grocery store clerk? At the top, you know, the first paragraph that we always find on a job description is the job summary. To write that, I would suggest you ask yourself a couple of questions. For the first sentence, what does this position spend the most time doing? So if I was doing this for myself, I would say I spend the majority of my time supporting clients in answering their human resources needs. If I were doing this for an accounting clerk, I would say the accounting clerk spends the majority of their time processing invoices for payment if they're an AP clerk. So that's your first sentence. What do they spend the most time doing? Simple enough. The second is maybe where it gets a little bit more complicated, and you might think about even talking to the employee about why this position exists, or talking to upper management or your peers. Why is this position here? Why does it exist? What does the position contribute to accomplishing the company's mission, vision, goals? What is it contributing? And where does the position fit in the overall business process? So we've recently been working with an insurance company, and we are looking at those people that intake requests for insurance quotes, and they process those. So it goes through underwriting and review and so forth. So the purpose of those positions tends to be to serve internal customers, not the external customer. So the external customer is served by the insurance agent. The processing of that request for a quote is served by the underwriter, the processing, the person who does the binding on the policy, and so forth and so on. So that's another important question to ask yourself, is who is the customer for this position? And all of this information can be combined to write your purpose statement for that position. Another thing that can be very effective, and probably would be my number one thing if you don't have time to sit down and think about any of these other tips that I give you, I would say start with expectations. What is the expectation? It's very easy to write the responsibility. For example, the grocery store clerk example is to contribute to the company's goal of providing excellent customer service. But that's kind of vague. Lots of people might have a different definition of what is excellent customer service. So the grocery store that we're working with said we want to define what does excellent look like and how do we know it when we see it. So to communicate this in a very clear way to the employee, we use the SMART method. And so if you've been through one of my trainings before, you have probably been introduced to this for setting goals, but you can also use it to communicate expectations. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So breaking this down, I would say, let's get specific. What do we want them to do? We want them to greet customers warmly and courteously within 10 seconds of their arrival. That is our performance expectation. Is that measurable? In this case, the way that the client measures success in that position is the grocery store clerk is expected to achieve a customer satisfaction rating of 90% or higher. And they do this through post-interaction surveys. I just noticed recently when I was checking out at the grocery store, when I ran my credit card, the next thing that it asked me was to rate the customer service that I received that day. And I could push, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. And I imagine that that checker gets some feedback based on that in that survey that I completed. Is it achievable? Of course, what we want them to do is ensure interactions are consistently positive and professional. So achievable is something that we want to think about in terms of what are we expecting, and is it over the top? If I was in a bad mood whenever I went to check out at the grocery store, which with the prices these days, you may very well be in a bad mood. Or is that person carrying something that happened outside the store in their mind? Or did they have an interaction with another person that affected their feedback? We can't say we want a 100% satisfaction score. So I can say, 90% is reasonable. You're going to satisfy 9 out of 10 people that you come in contact with. And is it relevant? Like, why are we even doing this? And this company does have a goal of providing excellent customer service. They continuously monitor it. They implement programs and training around it. So absolutely, it is relevant, and they want to see the outcomes of their efforts. And is it time bound? When are we going to look at this? And these employees are reviewed on a monthly basis, maybe not a full performance review, but we do continually sit down and look at customer service scores. And if we see somebody falling below that 90%, that triggers a coaching meeting where we sit down and determine what's going on. Does the person need more training? Do they need maybe somebody shadowing them to give them helpful tips on connecting with the customer? What is it they need, so that we are continuously reviewing and ensuring that everyone is a success in achieving the expectations that we have set. Another thing that can be very helpful is prioritizing. If you look at the average job description, I would say the majority of them probably have 10 to even as many as 15 different responsibilities or duties listed there. I would say it is very important to prioritize those, because if, say as a human resources consultant, and I am also a manager of a team, what are my priorities? Is my focus primarily supposed to be on the customer, or is it supposed to be on managing my team? Well, in my position, I manage a group of professionals. So those professionals don't need a ton of day-to-day guidance and coaching and training. They came to me with those skills already. So remember back at the beginning of the presentation, I said that my number one priority, my essential responsibility is serving clients, and my secondary responsibility is managing my team. That's going to be different depending on the context of the management role, or any role for that matter. So I would suggest that you use very clear section headings so that people understand, if I am pressed for time or if I have competing priorities, where should I focus? And this is a good way to let them know that. Within those sections, I would continue to prioritize, because if we've got 10 different duties listed, say there's 5 in essential responsibilities and 5 in secondary responsibilities, it is entirely possible that there are 2 or 3, or sometimes on a Monday, even 5 competing responsibilities. So this gives an employee guidance as to decision making and what is the priorities. And although I can't skirt any of my responsibilities, what do I go to first? Or what do I raise a red flag to my manager when I say, I have too many things that are competing and I need help? So within those sections, I would list those responsibilities in order of importance. And if you have to go even further, maybe even frequency. But let's put some context in those job descriptions, and those continue to become tools for the employee to use. As you're writing your job description, you'll even want to use language that highlights this information. When we're talking about essential responsibilities, we often use terms like critical, or a main responsibility, or the primary responsibility for this position is blah, blah, blah. In the secondary section, I may say this position supplements the accounting department whenever they have the open bandwidth to do that. Or an additional responsibility is to provide training to their teammates, or something like that. So use that language appropriately so that it highlights the priorities within the job description. And when in doubt, when it's difficult to maybe make a list or put a list in order, explain why certain responsibilities are essential and how they contribute to the overall objective of the role or the organization. And by that, I mean, there may be an essential duty that's essential in your eyes, but if an employee or an outsider, say from Texas Workforce Commission or from the EEOC, if they were reading that job description, they would think, why on earth would you list this as an essential responsibility? Let's take, for example, the grocery store clerk. One of the responsibilities that's on their job description is to keep their work area sanitized. Well, if you've never worked in a grocery store before, you might not know that as you're running meat or vegetables across a scanner, those items leave behind bacteria, and that can be a threat to public health if those areas aren't sanitized. So that's an essential duty for a grocery store checker. Now, for a human resources consultant, I think we need to keep our work area organized, but sanitized is probably not a requirement. So context and examples are very important to communicate basically your why behind the requirement. So the next thing is standards of performance. And I came across this and came to understand performance standards as being different years ago when I worked for Park Place dealerships. And if you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, You may be familiar with Park Place dealerships. It's very high-end cars. They sell Mercedes, Porsche, Bentley. So these are extremely high-end cars and discerning customers that they have. And at the time that I worked for them, we were going out for a quality award, which is called the Malcolm Baldrige Award. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that every single person who entered our dealership had exactly the same experience, regardless of the employee that they were interacting with. And we set up company-wide standards for performance. And one of those was that whenever a person were to ask us directions, say I, as the human resources manager, was just happened to be walking through the showroom and a customer said, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the parts department is?" I was not to just point them down the hall and to the left. I was supposed to say, "My pleasure, let me take you to the department." And I was to walk with the customer to the parts department. Grocery stores often have similar performance standards. For example, if you say, "Hey, I can't find the salad dressing," lots of grocery stores might say, "Sure, it's on aisle 12 on the second shelf," and they send you on your way to still never find that salad dressing that you were looking for. But a higher end grocery store or a grocery store with higher expectations of their employee may say, "Never tell the customer where to find an item, instead show them and ensure that they find the item that they're looking for." One of the companies that I think is really, really good at communicating their principles and what they expect from their people is Chewy. So if you're not familiar with Chewy, that is a company that sells pet items like dog food or medicines for animals and toys and crates and all sorts of stuff. And they are just really, really well known for their customer service. So whenever you get this PDF of the slides, you'll be able to click the link here and see their operating principles. And this is where company-wide standards for performance come from. They may come from the company's goals, objectives, their mission statement, or even their values, but they are common expectations for every single employee, just as I previously noted. And you'll see these in areas that everyone is responsible for typically. Customer service. We all have customers. Even if it's not an external customer, we have internal customers. So every single position in every single company all over the world, all of them have a customer, or else they wouldn't have a job. Another area that we often see company-wide standards of performance is in safety or in treatment of coworkers. This includes your diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. This also encompasses oftentimes communication standards and so forth. So those are standards that every single person must meet. There are also standards that can be included in the job description that are only for a specific position or department. So when you're forming these, I would challenge you to ask yourself, what is expected in everything that this position does? So this is what's different between a standard and an expectation. So an expectation is more like you will make 22 widgets per hour on average. A standard is that you will show customers where to find widgets on the shelf. So a standard is more of a general way of behaving and performing. This is how we do our job, not what we do in our job. So I was thinking, and a good example is if you have a human resources department in your company, 3 standards that would apply to every single person in that department, regardless of their position, is they absolutely must maintain strict confidentiality at all times. They must ensure that every single action, policy, and procedure complies with applicable state and federal law. These are non-negotiables, regardless of the HR position. And lastly, something that may be specific to a company, but it is a way that the company wants their employees to behave, the way they want them to do their job, is that whenever they're deciding between options, they always want the person to choose the option that does the most good for the most people. So that kind of harkens back to probably the company values. So you can see how these values cascade down through the organization and result in performance standards. So once you've got this all set up and are ready to start working on the job descriptions and making them really work for you, I would suggest that you involve employees in writing their job descriptions. Whenever you involve people in processes, it typically means that you will have a greater likelihood of buy-in from the people who were able to contribute. So I would simply ask your team, sit down and give me a list of your responsibilities in order of importance, or maybe according to the process, as you see them. So Miss AP Clerk, Mr. Salesman, Miss HR Generalist, list out all of your responsibilities. And this might be an interesting exercise for you to also see if your view of the position aligns with what the person in the position sees it as. And then ask them to take it a step further. Describe what great looks like for each one of those responsibilities. So if they list customer service as being one of their responsibilities, what does great customer service look like? And have them, define that and list the attributes that they view as great. And I would even encourage them to talk with their customers, whether that be internal customers or external customers. If you're a grocery store clerk, every single person that you encounter, your mom, your dad, your aunt, your uncle, your neighbor, those are all grocery store customers. So ask them, like, what do you think when you think about great customer service at the grocery store? Or quite a few of our clients are in medical practices. Almost everybody's been to a doctor at some point in time, right? So kind of talk to people in your life and ask them what's important to them. So get your team members to do that. Take that information, and you can go through a number of exercises with them. Maybe ask them, okay, let's make an expectation. You do a collections report every single month. What is the expected days outstanding on an AR report? And they may start at 60 days, but you're thinking more like 30. So have a back and forth conversation with them and engage them in what is realistic. And that will really help you to get buy-in and agreement. So once you get that all done, determine how performance will be measured. So you want to make sure that your review strategy, the form, and the procedure fulfills your needs. And I'll put a big asterisk by this particular bullet point because next month I am going to be talking about performance review systems. There are a million different ways to review performance. We just need to determine what problems you're trying to solve or what needs you're trying to fulfill with that system. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on next month. But once you get the system in place, how will you measure success? Like, what do you need? Do you need reports, customer service surveys? Are you going to keep a journal of interactions between you and the employee, or maybe a journal of comments that you receive from clients about that person? And then finally, when will you review the performance? I encourage everyone to have monthly check-ins with employees. This may be, not a time that you want to talk about and give a performance review every single time. But if it is, say, a report that the employee doesn't see on a regular basis, it may be an opportunity to just say, hey, here's your current customer service score. You're currently at 85%. You're almost at that goal of 90%. We've got reviews coming up here in a couple of months. Let's talk about what I can do to help you achieve that 90% goal. So it's a good catalyst for conversation. And then roll out these job descriptions. They've contributed, you've contributed. Sit down with everybody, make sure that they understand the expectations, how it will be measured, and what the appraisal schedule will be, and get their agreement. If you're getting a lot of pushback, might be a signal that either your expectations are unrealistic or your employees don't understand why or how to meet those expectations. So you might have a little bit more communicating to do. And then once you get that all cleared up, implement your procedures. I say schedule those meetings in advance. Go ahead and put them on the calendar so that they don't get biased without realizing that so much time has passed. And once you're in the meeting, you're going to sit down with that job description and go through every single item and talk about how they're doing. And I think this moves us closer, possibly, to that goal of a really easy performance review, whether it's either a yes or a no. Are they meeting expectations or not? So with that, I will say thank you very much for joining us today. Our next session will be on July 30th at 1 p.m. Central, and I'm going to talk about going beyond the basic performance review, talk about why we choose the performance factors, the measurements, how we set goals, and you make those performance reviews tools that you will really use and that employees can truly grow and develop from. Until then, I would encourage you to consider this. What am I trying to accomplish with a performance review? Am I using it for compensation? Am I using it for succession planning or training and development? What is it that I'm trying to get out of my performance review? Because that's going to be the very first question that I ask you whenever we start our next session in July. Until then, I will take any questions that you happen to have. I don't see anything coming in the chat, but I'll hang on here for just a minute. If anybody wants to enter anything, I would certainly be happy to answer it. And if you don't have anything that you want to talk about publicly, you can always email me, or if you're already one of our clients, you can email your team member, your HR consultant, and they'll be glad to help you with those things. For the month of July, we are offering a 10% off discount on assisting you in writing job descriptions. That's both your traditional and your supercharged variety, depending on where you want to start. So if you're interested in doing that, drop me an email and we can get to work on that right away. And I promise it will absolutely be worth your time and money to go through this exercise. So I'm not getting any questions. I will sign off and tell you to have a great day. If you're in Texas, I hope you stay indoors and stay cool, and let us know if there is anything that we can do to help you. Bye.